If you clicked on this video, then you're probably considering a career as a professional fundraiser. And if that's the case, that's fantastic because we don't have nearly enough fundraising professionals for all the nonprofits that need them. Or maybe you're a nonprofit volunteer and you're just curious about the work that your development colleagues and partners are doing. Or maybe you're just curious. In any case, welcome. I'm Theresa Davis, and I have 30 years of experience as a frontline fundraiser, fundraising executive, and development coach. And if you're interested in learning more about what it's like to have a career as a fundraiser, then you've come to the right place. Because in today's video, you're going to learn about the types of fundraisers, what professional fundraisers do on the daily, a little bit about average salaries, and how to land your first job in fundraising. So let's get started. Now, there are approximately 1.5 million 501c3 nonprofits in the United States. These nonprofits help meet the community needs that government and business alone don't fully address. There needs to be a partnership amongst all three in order for them to get the work done. Governments typically don't have the funding to do it, and frankly, even the wherewithal. Businesses, they exist for shareholder wealth, and while they want to be good community partners, they don't have the resources or the expertise to take care of all of the individuals who need their help. And so it's a partnership between nonprofits, which do specialize in those services, the government, which provides the infrastructure, and the businesses that frankly tend to have the funding. They provide essential services like food, housing, education, healthcare, and support services, and they work to improve society by advancing social causes, education, the arts, and the environment, just to name a few. And they focus on making an impact, not making profits for owners or shareholders, which is really the focus of businesses. And they reinvest their funding back into their mission and programs. Businesses, alternatively, they reinvest their funding and their resources back into the company and in providing shareholder wealth. They partner with government and businesses to strengthen communities and improve the quality of life. So when you think of some examples of 501c3 nonprofits, you've heard of most or all of these: hospitals, universities, houses of worship, food banks, animal shelters, zoos, orchestras, nature preserves. Those are just some of the many 501c3 types. Now, a healthy nonprofit tends to diversify and must, in fact, diversify its revenue streams. And they do this for at least a couple of reasons. One is to decrease the risk of collapse in case of one funding source and that drying up. And we've seen this too often with nonprofits where they may have a couple of individual donors, maybe 2 or 3 grants, one of them really large that they depend on, and after 3 or 5 or 1 year, one of those major grants goes away and they don't have the funding they need to provide their programs. The other reason why they want to diversify their revenue streams is so that they can expand their reach to different kinds of supporters. And so instead of just getting government grants, then they're also getting funding from community foundations, which exist for the sole purpose of giving away money to causes that that are within their mission scope. And they are exposed to individuals who care about what they do. And so they expand their reach from, for example, just getting government grants to now to individuals who know and care about their cause, to companies that care about their cause, to individuals that care about their cause. And on the right side in the pie chart, you'll see the various types of funding streams or revenue streams. And so the largest amount, about 50% or so, and again, this is on average across the country, about 50% of funding tends to come from individuals and organizations, right? So that would be everyday citizen, organizations, might be foundations, that kind of thing. The next largest slice, 30%, comes from government grants and contracts, where the government is funding what the nonprofit does. About 15% from corporate sponsorships and other kinds of support, like you may have a company that wants to support research going on at a university. And then you have other kinds of funding, which is at a much smaller amount. And that is for things that are like earned income programs, about 15% or so. And that might be, for example, the nonprofit may have a store, like the California Science Center, which is a nonprofit. It's like collaboration actually between the state and private funding. And they actually have a discovery store where they can sell things. Well, that money goes primarily back into the nonprofit, into the Science Center. And so when next we talk about what it is that philanthropy does and how it helps. And so, what are philanthropic funds? So, on the largest amount of funding came from philanthropic funding. And what is that exactly? So, it's money donated by individuals, families, corporations, or foundations. It's given with no expectation of direct financial or material return. Rather than the requirement is social benefit and lasting impact. And so, if it's a company, then those funds are so that they, again, it's to advance shareholder wealth, of course, the well-being of the company, but nonprofits exist with no expectation of any return. And so you may have a company that gives money to fund research at a university, as I mentioned before, where they're not expecting that faculty member to conduct research that they're now going to turn over to them. They may have interest in the work that that professor is doing, but what they're actually hoping is that they will just continue their research and perhaps be able to hear about what the faculty member is doing later and that kind of thing. Philanthropic funds also frequently are secured by the nonprofit's fundraising staff, which is why I bring this up, right? Of all the funding that comes in, we're getting to what it is that fundraisers do and why it's important. And they focus on the nonprofit's philanthropic funds. And so, what's the role of philanthropy actually in a nonprofit and how does it help? And so, what it does is that it represents a critical funding stream that enables nonprofits to innovate, expand programs, and respond to community needs. It's professional fundraisers who are essential in cultivating these relationships and securing sustainable support. You'll have individuals who are working in the nonprofit and they're doing other things there. For example, I mentioned the California Science Center, which has a number of science exhibits that the community can come and enjoy, where the CEO is doing the work of running the organization. You'll have those who are in charge of the exhibits. The fundraisers are responsible for raising the nonprofit philanthropic funds that will help the Science Center to thrive. And those supporters are individual donors who make personal contributions and who believe in the mission. Foundations are structured grant-making organizations supporting specific causes. They exist for the sole purpose of giving away philanthropic dollars to nonprofits who are causes that are conducting, who are helping in ways that the foundation cares about. And so when you look at the next group of philanthropists, it's corporate giving. These are business partnerships and philanthropic programs that are aligned with values. So companies that give to nonprofits that are in alignment with the causes that that company cares about. So what is it exactly that professional fundraisers do? Well, they do a number of things. One is that they build relationships. So they cultivate meaningful connections with donors and prospective donors, people who aren't giving yet to the organization, but they may actually care about the work that that nonprofit is doing. And it's the fundraisers that go out, they identify them and start to bring them into the organization, help them to learn more about the cause in the hopes that they will fund it. They develop the strategies around this. So they actually create comprehensive fundraising plans that are aligned with organizational goals. And so they will look at it, they go out and they find individuals who may want to fund what the nonprofit is doing, and they develop an actual plan. I like to think of it as the philanthropic journey that they're going to take that person on to understand what the nonprofit does, hopefully fall in love with what the organization does, give to the cause, and become engaged and involved and excited about their giving. Professional fundraisers secure gifts. They solicit and steward those contributions that advance the mission. So they're the people, typically, and but not always, the person who asks the individual to make a gift to the nonprofit. And who asks for those gifts actually depends on who's the best person, and that's part of the strategy. Who's the person that the prospective donor is most likely to say yes to? That could be the CEO of the nonprofit. That could be the person who's actually developing and running the programs. It could be the fundraiser, him or herself, but they are the ones responsible for securing those gifts. And they ensure stewardship. They are sure that the organization expresses gratitude and demonstrates the impact, right, to the person. What's the benefit that their gifts, that their donations, that their dollars made in the growth of that organization? And so the advancement division, I mentioned that I've been a fundraiser for actually a little more than 30 years. And I was a part of the fundraiser of what's called the advancement division. And that's the area that fundraisers work in, right? And they aren't the only ones that make up that division. They have strategic communications, and it's that part of the organization that actually conveys to the general public what it is that the nonprofit does, whether it's a hospital or school, a museum, wildlife preserve. They are the team that conveys the mission and goals of the organization, the good work that it does. And so they are the ones that convey the message. Alumni relations, if you're with a university, and sometimes with a hospital, right? There are sometimes organizations that will consider people their alumni, but mostly you hear about that with colleges and universities, right? And this is the organization that stays in touch with the people who have probably benefited most from the organization because they're alumni, they're graduates of it. They keep them connected, or they try to keep them connected to the organization. Government and community relations. This is the team, the part of the team that develops relationships with the communities in which the nonprofit is living, and also government relations, because colleges and universities depend very often on funding from the government, and they want to be sure that those relationships are close. And so these relationships in the development team, it has to do with fundraising, but the advancement division creates and fosters important relationships that are valuable to the mission of the organization. And as I've just demonstrated, it's not always financial. So I've said this is a proposed university advancement organizational chart because I wanted to give you some examples of what an advancement team might look like. But it's actually not proposed. There are a number of different structures, but this is probably a pretty standard one. So at the very top, you'll have the vice president of university advancement who is likely to have an executive assistant. And then these 6 or so areas are typical. So on the far left, you have the associate vice president of development. And for example, at a university, that team might have an executive director of college and program development, and that person would be over all of the fundraising that's happening in all of the different colleges, the College of Business, the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, also in athletics very often. You might also have an executive director of central development, and that person has responsibility for fundraising that happens in areas like corporate relations, foundation relations, the annual giving team. And we'll talk about annual giving in a bit. The annual giving team might live. This is also where the database and research teams might be. So that's the development operation. And then you might have an associate vice president of government and community relations. And I talked to you about how these are the people who help to enhance the relationships with local and federal and state governments. And so they might have an executive director of federal relations and an executive director of community relations. And again, I've just gone a couple of tiers down. These teams, if they're large, may have a number of other team members that are there, but these are some pretty standard and like top 2 or 3 tier offices. The associate vice president of alumni relations might have an executive director of alumni engagement and programming, someone else who might be a director of business development and memberships, right? And so this might be the people who, if you have alumni and there are different kinds of memberships that they can be a part of. Maybe they are responsible for being sure their alumni email addresses and that kind of thing. So they may have that as well. The associate vice president of marketing and communications might have a director of media relations who deals with the media, deals with journalists. Another person who's an executive director of brand narrative. So I mentioned to you that this team is responsible for conveying who the organization is, the impact that they have, what it is that they do. So they may have someone who manages the brand of that nonprofit. Associate vice president of advancement services, where they have a director of prospect research and a director of gift processing. And then all the way to the right, associate VP of administration and finance. This might be the budget, have a budget analyst, and also where human resources for advancement exists. And so that's an example of what a university org chart might look like. But if it's a nonprofit advancement team, their department structure might look a little bit different, but a lot of it is the same. So you might have what's called a chief advancement officer. And for sure, most likely 3 different areas. So the development office, where you might have a major gifts officer, a grant writer who is applying for grants through foundations. And there are corporations, by the way, there are companies that have foundations attached to them. For example, Ford Motor Company also has the Ford Motor Company Foundation. And so they give away money as well. They may have an events manager. I would say that community nonprofits are much more fundraising events heavy than, say, universities and colleges are. And so they may actually have an events manager. Universities might have them too, but many nonprofits will usually have at least one annual gala. That's a fundraising gala for them. And then a development coordinator. Over on the marketing side of the house, they might have a digital marketing specialist, a content creator who does their magazines, newsletters, that kind of thing. Maybe does some of the content that's going to be online. Maybe they're managing, along with the digital marketing specialist, their Facebook account, that kind of thing. Then a community relations manager, kind of like government and community relations. They might have an advocacy lead, volunteer liaison, and a program coordinator. So that's, both of these structures are sort of standard, but they're not the only structures that exist. And so now, what are the types of fundraising specialties, right? So it's basically these 5 different areas that are the different kinds of fundraisers. It's annual giving, major gifts, corporate relations, foundation relations, and plan giving. And now we're going to talk a little bit about what each of them does. And so when you think of the annual giving team, very often you might think about the phone-a-thons. And when you get a call from a nonprofit and they're asking you if you'll make a gift, that's typically coming from their annual giving function, right? And so I want to talk with you about each of these types of fundraisers and what they do, and then give you just a taste of what their typical day might be like. So in annual giving, that person manages the regular donor programs, direct mail campaigns. You get a letter in the mail asking you to make a gift, and online fundraising efforts to build a broad base of support. So they're looking at trying to get many donors, and it may be smaller gifts, but many people, right? And so this is where you might find someone giving you a gift of $50 or $100, $500, right? But they're trying to get as many people involved in supporting the nonprofit as possible. So the typical day for an annual giving officer might be that they review reports showing the status of key metrics. And so annual giving is something that restarts after every 365 days. A typical fiscal year might begin July 1 and end June 30th of the next year. And annual giving directors, they have projects and programs to raise money that go for that 365 days. And then July 1 of the next year, they start all over again in terms of setting dollar goals and that kind of thing. And so because it's a relatively short period of time, they pay very close attention to key data. And you may have an annual giving director who is getting reports either every day, some of them, or at the very least every Monday. So they're looking at things like donor acquisition. Have we been able to get new donors? The retention rate. Are we keeping the current donors that we have? Fluctuations in total gifts, right? And so last year they raised $500,000. What are they raising this year? Did it go up? Did it go down? Is it staying flat? If we want to raise more money, then what is the button we need to push, the various levels, tools in the toolkit that we need to work with in order to raise more money? The annual giving officer may be drafting text for a letter and email appeals, plan digital and phone engagement strategies, and collaborate with the team on Giving Tuesday website and participants, right? And so you may have heard of Giving Tuesday. It's a time in the year when many nonprofits across the country actually have campaigns to raise money. And they may have a website that's up all day, and they're doing all kinds of fun things and inviting people to make gifts to the organization. And so, they're a lot of fun, but they take a lot of time. And so that's a typical day for an annual giving director. What about a major gift officer? So I said that annual giving fundraisers are looking at raising maybe smaller dollar amounts, but from a lot of people. They're trying to get a broad base of support. Major gift officers are the opposite. They're trying to get significantly larger gifts, and that's going to come from a relatively small number of people. So these fundraisers cultivate relationships with high capacity donors for significant contributions that have the potential to transform the organization. Substantially large gifts. And what's considered a substantially large or a high capacity donor depends on the nonprofit, right? They really define what's considered a large gift or a major gift for them. For one nonprofit, a major gift might be $5,000, where for another nonprofit, a major gift starts at $50,000 or $100,000. And so it's up to the nonprofit to determine what that is for them. So a typical day for a major gift officer is that they might reach out to a prospective donor to arrange a gift conversation or a qualification meeting, right? And what I mean by that is if it's a gift conversation, they've been working with that individual for some time, and now they want to ask them about making a very specific kind of gift. Or a qualification meeting is somebody who the major gift officer has identified as potentially a donor, but they don't know. They may have seen evidence of that. The person has made a gift to a similar kind of organization, and the gift was relatively large. But because the person gave to that organization and they made a large gift, doesn't mean they're going to give to this organization. So the fundraiser is going to have a conversation with the person to find out more about them, find out what their philanthropic interests are, and see if they are truly a potential donor for this organization. They may collaborate that day with the program director on writing a proposal for support of a new project. If they're at a museum and they want to have funding for a new exhibit, then the fundraiser may sit down with the person who is in charge of exhibits and learn more about what the project is, why it's important, why anybody should want to give to it. So finding out more before they actually try to identify donors for it. The person may accompany the president to solicit a board member for a gift, to expand on an existing facility, or meet with the prospect management team for a donor portfolio review. And so major gift officers carry a portfolio of individuals, just the names of individuals that they are responsible for cultivating the relationship with those individuals. They create a plan. I talked to you earlier about the philanthropic journey, right? And so they have people in their portfolio who they have reason to believe may want to support the organization. And that fundraiser, for the most part, spends their entire day planning and working around that portfolio. They're either going to talk to someone because someone mentioned their name, and they're going to try and identify those individuals. They're going to try to either qualify them to see if they truly might have interest in being a donor for their nonprofit. They're going to, if they are, they're going to try to cultivate that relationship, get them engaged with the nonprofit to learn more about it, fall in love with them. They're going to be the person who's going to either solicit them for the gift or arrange the meeting for someone else to ask, and then they're going to steward them, be sure that they understand and appreciate the impact of their giving, right? And so that's a typical day for a major gift officer. For someone who's in corporate relations, this individual develops strategic partnerships with businesses through research funding, sponsorships, cause marketing, employee giving programs, that kind of thing. And so there are companies who want to support, they want to be good corporate citizens and they want to support the nonprofits in their areas. And so these fundraisers develop relationships between those particular companies and the nonprofit. So a typical day for corporate, excuse me, a corporate fundraiser might be to travel to the Midwest and East Coast for a week of meetings with corporate donors to discuss the status of campus research that they're funding, or outreach to local companies to invite their attendance and sponsorship at a business dean's economic forecast luncheon. Or they might be hosting a summit on campus with key Silicon Valley companies to hear faculty research advances in quantum computing, for example. Now, for development officers who are involved in foundation relations, these are officers who research grant opportunities, write compelling proposals, and manage foundation relationships to secure institutional funding. So a typical day for a foundation relations fundraiser might be they're going to conduct research to identify private foundations that support key priorities that will need additional funding within the next year. And so they've looked at perhaps their nonprofit has 5 foundation grants, and 2 of them are going to be finished. The foundation was paying that grant over 3 years, and they're now in year 2, and so they might have 1 more year of funding. And so they're going to not wait until that money runs out. They're going to start to see what foundation might want to replace that money. And so they may be spending some time doing that in a day, refining a grant proposal that's due for submission in a few days. Very often foundations will have deadlines. You need to submit your grant proposal by this date. And so the foundation fundraiser may be working on a proposal that's due to be turned in just a few days. Or they might host a site visit of a top grantor to see the status of projects that they're already funding, that they funded in the prior year, and they want to meet with the president and the person who's managing the project. And so perhaps the Moore Foundation is going to come to a particular nonprofit and take a look at how the program's going that they provided funding for last year. How's it going? Show us, they want to know the impact of the gift. Plan giving professionals work with donors on bequests, trusts, estate plans that create a lasting legacy while perhaps providing a tax benefit for the person who's giving it. And not all of these instruments are just someone placing the nonprofit in their will. In some cases, the nonprofit can benefit from a commitment from that while the person is still alive. And so the typical day for a plan giving officer might be to have lunch with a donor to sign an estate gift document, leaving the organization in their will. They might finalize marketing pieces to go to individuals who may be considering estate planning, inviting them to join the organization's legacy society. And so there will sometimes be marketing campaigns that universities, for example, might have to outreach to people of a certain age who may be thinking about leaving a gift to a nonprofit they care about in their will as their legacy. And so they may reach out to them, invite them to come to a luncheon. They may actually be hosting a Legacy Society luncheon for estate donors and prospective donors. And so for all of these kinds of fundraisers, each specialization requires unique skills and knowledge. They offer diverse career paths within the fundraising profession. And so you may have somebody who's an annual giving director today, where their focus has really been on short-term 365-day focus, looking at reports, every day they're trying to move the program along. They may decide they want to become a major gift officer, which has a longer time frame. You may be, a year or 18 months getting someone to give you a major gift. And so it's a much longer time frame. You may actually be longer than that trying to get somebody to give you a gift of multiple millions of dollars. Or a major gift officer who may decide they would rather deal with foundations, write grant proposals, that kind of thing. And so it takes a different set of talents. Some of them very similar talents, but they all specialize in certain areas and focus on certain skill set. So let's talk about salaries. I know that you're interested in this. Excuse me. I know that you're interested in salaries, and so let's talk a little bit about them. And this is now, keep in mind, average salaries um, across the country. And so the compensation is going to vary by experience level, the size of the organization. If you're a small um, community nonprofit, that doesn't have a lot of salary, you only have so much salary to pay versus, say, a large university, highly branded university that's known all over the world, right? They are going to have more money to give. And so the salary is going to vary by the organizational size, geographic location. You're going to likely earn significantly more in Los Angeles, California, than you might earn in Dayton, Ohio. The specialization area, major gift officers tend to earn more money than annual giving directors do. And so these figures represent national averages. And I would say for new to mid-level professionals. And so, for example, nationally, the national average for annual giving might be $52,000. And so entry to mid-level positions managing donor acquisition and retention programs might be about that amount of money. For major gift officers who cultivate these 6 and 7 figure gifts in larger organizations, sometimes 8 and 9 figure gifts, $68,000. For corporate relations, it's about 65. For foundation relations, about 62. They're fairly close together, nationally speaking. And for planned giving, $72,000, again, on average, right? And so each of these officers have different kinds of experience and are paid differently. So again, a lot of this depends on where you are. Provides a lot of career growth. And so if you go into it, into fundraising, you know that you're going to be able to have a lot of movement once you get into fundraising. It can be difficult to get into fundraising, honestly, and we'll talk more about that later. But once in, there's lots of opportunity for growth within your organization, perhaps certainly outside of your organization. So the career growth is strong. And after you get some experience, managers and directors often earn $80,000 to $110,000, again, on average. But in truth, there are mid-level managers, major gift officers who are earning 6 figures. And chief development officers commonly earn 120 to 160K, again, depending on the size and location of the nonprofit. And I'm certainly aware of a number of, say, vice presidents of advancement who are earning $500,000, right? And so you can certainly make a very nice living being in fundraising. And of course, if you're in a smaller town, then that salary sounds like a very little bit, but the cost of living is probably much less. I can tell you the cost of living is much less in Dayton, Ohio than it is in Los Angeles, California. So what are some key competencies from people who are in fundraising? So you need to have excellent written and verbal communication skills. These are people who write to people at some of the highest levels within an organization. Um, uh, and so they need to be able to write well and to communicate well verbally to convey a powerful message about the value that the organization brings to as a common good. Be good at relationship building and have interpersonal skills. They are the ones who are building some of these key relationships that their nonprofit has with people who have the potential to give them funding to actually fuel the work that the nonprofit is doing. So they need to be someone who has the ability to develop relationships. Strategic thinking and planning abilities. I mentioned earlier that these are the individuals in major gifts, and frankly, in all of them, that sort of take people on a bit of a philanthropic journey. The pace of that journey might be different depending on which area of fundraising you're talking about, whether it's annual giving, corporate fundraising, major gift fundraising, but they're all developing strategies for how to take those donors and potential donors along that philanthropic journey. And so they have to be able to think to understand who that donor is, what will inspire their giving, and to engage them in the organization in a way where they want to have a significant impact. They have to have extraordinary listening skills. You have to, certainly at points, listen more than you talk because you're trying to understand what it is that motivates that donor, what they really truly care about. And not everybody's going to come right out and tell you or tell the fundraiser what they care about. Sometimes they have to listen and ascertain, hear what they're not saying. Right? So you have to have extraordinary listening skills. And that's something that, a person can learn along the way. Be good at data analysis and donor database management, and have experience in that. Someone who knows how to look at information online, research, understand who the prospective donor is. That's whether or not you're talking about individuals or you're trying to understand a community foundation and what their mission is, what they want to fund, and um, understand what areas of your nonprofit might actually fit what they care about. Have project management, attention to detail capabilities, be able um, to actually manage particular projects. If you're in annual giving, I mentioned Giving Tuesday, and if you're in estate planning, then you may be doing doing some marketing outreach to identify people who might care about leaving a bequest or leaving a portion of their estate to the nonprofit. So you need to understand how to manage projects and to pay attention to the details. Some of those details, as I mentioned, sometimes a person won't come right out and tell you what they care about, and not because they're trying to be coy. Sometimes it's just because they themselves aren't entirely sure about why they're giving to the things that they give to. And so trying to understand what they're not saying is important. So paying attention to details. So how to land your first fundraising job? Well, you want to build a foundation. So you pursue relevant education in nonprofit management, communications, or business. There aren't really a lot of degrees out there in fundraising. I think I've heard of one or two, but there are some related. There are certificates, fundraising certificates, and that's fine. That's education as well, right? But it doesn't have to just be directly in fundraising. It could be in nonprofit management. My own master's degree it's a master's in public administration, and it has a focus on nonprofits. Could be communications or business, right? And then gain some experience. Become a volunteer, for example, with nonprofits and participate in their fundraising campaigns as a volunteer. Network actively. Join professional associations like the Association of Fundraising Professionals, AFP, and attend their industry events. And yes, they have memberships that are for students as well. Connect with working fundraisers to learn about their career paths and to gain insider perspectives. There will be so many fundraisers who will be more than happy to tell you about how they got into fundraising and what it's meant to them and to tell you about the ins and the outs. This is kind of how us fundraisers are. You will absolutely find many of them who would be happy to tell you about their path. Start with an entry-level coordinator or associate role. If you have no experience in fundraising, the chance that you're going to be able to walk in and become the director of corporate relations is not likely, and certainly not at the major gift level because it requires a little bit of finesse in terms of how you are working with high net worth individuals who may already be philanthropic someplace else, and so they kind of know what that journey should look like and would have expectations around it. So start out entry level, right, and look for opportunities to grow. Highlight transferable skills from previous experience when you're talking with, if you've made application. For example, for annual giving. So annual giving is actually a good entry into fundraising. Sometimes they'll hire you as an assistant director coming in, and you may have responsibility for the phonathon. There are student workers at universities who are phonathon managers, and so they may bring you in as entry level into annual giving. So if you're talking with someone and you've applied for a job in fundraising, highlight the transferable skills that you have from previous experience. Did you do any customer service? Did you have a customer service job? Did you do sales anywhere? Were you a junior journalist or were you a journalist, right? You could be a professional in a different kind of industry and you're transferring over. You want to transfer over into fundraising. Talk about the kind of experience that you have that would work well as a fundraiser. Consider smaller organizations for broader exposure. So, nonprofits, colleges too, they're relatively small. They have small fundraising staffs. You get to be in some ways a Jack or a Jane of all trades, right? And so you may be the event planner, but you also get to work a little bit with corporate sponsorships or that kind of thing. And so consider starting out at a smaller, or maybe staying at even a smaller organization and get broader exposure to fundraising experience. And consider pursuing the Certified Fundraising Executive Credential. It's called the CFRE. After you gain some experience to demonstrate your professional expertise for one thing, in order to attain that certificate, there's a certain amount of additional learning and education that you have to go through. But the other thing that it does is that it shows how serious you are about the profession. You've taken that extra step. And then some final words of wisdom about office etiquette, right? And so, you know, in the fundraising profession, the culture, you might call it, across all types, it tends to be a little bit conservative, and I mean only in terms of demeanor. And here's what I mean by that. So when you're in the fundraising office, you're handling people's money. And the people whose money you're handling want to know that you're a serious person, that you're serious about what you're doing and serious about taking good care of their investment. And I don't mean that you're a super serious person and you take everything, you can't laugh at yourself. I'm not talking about that. And I'll talk about that more in a moment. But in terms of the dress code, you do want to be sure that you're professional, that what you're wearing is clean, well-fitting, and it's respectful attire, right? You don't want to you don't want to be walking around uh, in attire that people feel is not respectful of the office that you're in. And that'll be different based on where you are, based on the culture of your organization. And so when you get there, if you're going for an interview, look around and see how other people are dressed, but you want to be taken seriously. In terms of your conversation, just say no to gossip, backbiting, and political discussions. I know that for some people this sounds like a lot of fun, but the old adage that you should steer clear of conversations about religion and politics holds true. It can really go south very quickly. And your demeanor, right? How you carry yourself. You want to have a maturity that conveys competence, seriousness about the work, that you have a good sense of humor and a spirit of collaboration. In fundraising, people collaborate all the time with different colleagues. You're working with people from different kinds of backgrounds, and so you need to show that you're serious about the work, that they can entrust you with the dollars that they're giving to you, but that you're fun to work with too. So your fundraising career awaits if you want it, right? It's meaningful work. You make a direct impact on causes that you care about while you're building a rewarding career. The growth potential is amazing. You can advance from entry-level positions to leadership roles with increasing responsibility. In some ways, fundraising is like an apprenticeship. Like I mentioned, there aren't a whole lot of degrees. I actually don't know of any. There may be one. There are fundraising certificates. And so very often people sort of, fall into fundraising. They got a degree. My degrees in business administration and in public administration. There's some people who, and those are related fields, right? There are some people who got a degree in English and they had no expectation they were going to end up in fundraising. But what happens is you get into this entry level work and you're working with other fundraisers. You get to know fundraising and how it's done. And you learn by doing, you learn by being in the environment. So it's a lot like an apprenticeship in some ways. And there are diverse opportunities. You can choose from multiple specializations across thousands of nonprofit organizations. Take your pick. Pick a type of nonprofit that you care about, whether it's children and families or the environment or wildlife. Take your pick. And there are so many different ways in which you can get involved with organizations that you really care about. The nonprofit sector needs talented, committed professionals to secure the resources that change lives and communities. Your fundraising career can be both personally fulfilling and professionally dynamic. In other words, you can do well by doing good. As I said, the salaries that you saw, depending if you live out here in California, those may seem like very modest salaries. And in some parts of the country, they don't seem modest at all. But you can absolutely make a very good living as a fundraiser, depending on what you want to do and what level of growth you want to get to. There are absolutely people who are making six figures in this profession. So if you want more tips on how to land your first fundraising job, see Breaking into Fundraising, a quick start guide for beginners in the description below. I'm going to link it there. And if you liked this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone you think might like to see it. And please be on the lookout for my 5-part series, Major Gift Fundraising 101.